Well, the Supreme Court is now weighing the fate of a blockbuster case involving transgender rights. At the center is whether it's constitutional for Tennessee to ban children and teens from receiving gender-affirming care, which can include treatments like puberty blockers and hormone therapy.
Oral arguments wrapped up here a short time ago with lawyers for the Biden administration making the case that the law is a form of sex discrimination, while Tennessee said lawmakers are justified in denying medical care for people under 18. And a ruling here could have significant implications across the country as well. You have more than half of U.S. states adopting similar laws banning gender-affirming care. With us now is CNN Chief Supreme Court Analyst Joan Biskupic, who was in court today. What stood out to you, Joan?
Sure. It was just a very gripping 2.5 hours of oral argument. Very compelling from both sides. And I'll get to the bottom line, but I also want to give you a couple of examples. There was real conservative momentum on behalf of Tennessee. It looks like they're going to have a majority to uphold this Tennessee law and say that it is not sex discrimination to block this kind of gender-affirming treatment. I can explain a little bit about where the justices in the majority were, but I also want to mention right at the start the kind of anger and frustration that became evident from the 3 liberal justices when they could feel the whole thing moving in the opposite direction. For the justices who really want to vote with Tennessee, it seemed like what concerned them most is the fact that judges and justices shouldn't be making this decision. It's something that should be left to the legislative process. Justice Alito really complained a lot about what kinds of studies really show that this might be beneficial. He tried to poke holes in the Biden administration and the ACLU lawyers' cases about this, how this could help people. But let's see if we can hear from Chief Justice John Roberts and what he said about how they might not really be up to the task of looking at this kind of medical treatment.
Here, it seems to me that the medical issues are much more heavily involved than in many of the cases that you look to. And of course, we are not the best situated to address issues like that, unlike in, like Morales and Craig v. Bourne and some of the other ones where it doesn't strike me that they're intensely affected by medical considerations. And if that's true, doesn't that make a stronger case for us to leave those determinations to the legislative bodies rather than try to determine them for ourselves?
Yeah, and I have to say that was the tone from the others on the right wing throughout. Justice Kavanaugh at one point said, well, who decides? Should it really be us deciding? I'll tell you, the one person we did not hear from at all during that entire 2.5 hour period was Neil Gorsuch. And it's important because Neil Gorsuch was the author of the one decision that the justices have already issued on transgender rights. And in that case, involving a statutory protection, not the Constitution as is at issue here, he wrote the opinion that said that in the workplace, transgender people should be protected from discrimination because it is based on sex. But he said nothing to either side, and obviously it might not matter what he thinks because it looked like there was a sure majority to, as I say, vote for Tennessee. Some of the concerns that came from the liberals is just, what's going to happen to some people who were already getting this treatment in Tennessee and not be able to complete the treatment. And Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first African-American woman on the court, did raise the question of, what about for all kinds of discrimination, all kinds of violations of the Equal Protection Clause? Are we going to be going backwards in that? Yeah. So. Very gripping.
Yeah, to your point, it was a fascinating argument to listen to from all sides to see where this is going to land. We've got some time before we see where it's going to land. But
watch in June.
That's why we have Joan Biskupic.
In June.
Joan, thanks so much, as always. Let's turn now to CNN's Lucy Kavanaugh live outside the Supreme Court, where demonstrators gathered today ahead of those oral arguments. Lucy, what was it like there in this really monumental moment as it unfolded?
Such a critical court case and so much energy here on the stage from the Supreme Court. There is a small but vocal opposition group here who's been protesting gender-affirming care, and then a much larger, much more colorful, louder group of people who have come to get their voices heard with this kind of gender-affirming care for the children. And one thing I really want to emphasize, there's a lot of conversations being had about transgender people. We are not hearing enough from the individuals who are affected, and our cameras have been spending time with several families who traveled all the way from Arizona to have their voices heard. These are not professional activists. They're normal kids, normal parents. They're taking time off work, off school to be here in order to have their voices be counted. And I spoke to one young girl, Violet Dumont, who's been open about being a transgender child. Here is how she felt being surrounded by all of these supporters here today. Take a listen.
It's honestly quite emotional, and hearing like the echo of the opposing kind of side be drowned out by cheers and music and voices of love and affirmation for Violet. Like, it's so powerful.
Violet, what does it feel like to be here finally?
It feels really good. I love how those mean people are just like, they're not being heard by anybody and being ignored, and I feel really glad to be here.
These families say they feel like their rights are being eroded, and regardless of how the Supreme Court rules, they will continue to be active, to continue organizing in their communities to help other families who are facing the same struggles as them. Back to you.
All right, Lucy Kafanoff, live for us from outside the court. Thank you.